My name is James Pieratt, and this is the third and final episode of Thug Life. So basically, the route itself was primarily on the Oregon portion of the Pacific Crest Trail. Got dropped off at Callahan's Lodge, which is about 20 miles south of Ashland, not too far above the border. And then I spent almost 2 days kind of hiking down to the actual border itself, at which point I made camp, kind of got everything ready mentally and started from there. And I just headed north on the Pacific Crest Trail. Almost all the way through, I ended up doing some sections on side trails and connecting trails, because it has hundreds and hundreds of trails that branch off all throughout it as it runs up through the state of Oregon and continues on from there. In terms of mileage, my initial plan had been to do roughly 50 miles a day, and at that pace, the 500 miles would take about 10 days or somewhere roughly in that neighborhood. I was expected 10 to 12 days, somewhere in that range. That plan, despite all the preparation and the fact that I was going into this in the best shape of my entire life, didn't last the first day. The first 3 days, 1, 2, and 3, I failed to hit my mileage badly. One of the days I only made it 26 miles. If I'm honest, was the first time in a long time where I felt mortal and like a physical activity like this. And I really had to I spent 72 hours really asking myself if I am who I thought I am, if I was able to do this at all. I'd be lying if I said that I ever actually contemplated quitting. I just had a real serious reality check imposed upon me. It wasn't even that I had been overly naive or unprepared. It was just the way things shook out. Specifically, this year, despite all the rain last year, a lot of the water sources in southern Oregon were still going to be pretty unreliable. So I had packed extra water with me and a little bit of extra food just to kind of, be on the safe side. And as it turned out, that was not at all a smart move to make. I knew coming in that I would be encountering elevation gain more than equivalent to climbing Mount Everest twice. So I was expecting a lot of that. What I had underestimated, though, was how much of that I would experience right off the bat, immediately just jumping into that. There was also the fact that there are currently a lot of blowdowns or fallen trees in Oregon, many of these just hundreds upon hundreds crossing the trail and blocking the trail. So it's difficult to build momentum when you're constantly stopping to duck under or climb over or move around a giant fallen tree. Some of these are just enormous too. Adding the weight to that, extra weight of the water, which wouldn't seem like that much, but every pounds equals pain, as they say, really made things difficult. On top of that, all of this was compounded by the fact that I hadn't really had a chance really to get used to the altitude. I live and train at sea level, and I started the event between 6,000 and 7,000 feet above sea level. So I just jumped into it 6,000 to 7,000 feet, about 6,500 feet above where my body is acclimated to operating. That's rough. It's not just that it makes you tired, you don't have enough oxygen in your body. It really kind of messes with your mind after a while. Just in general, but particularly when you start pushing it with an endurance exercise at altitude that you're not accustomed to for 24, 48, 72 hours, the mind kind of starts to turn against you a little bit. You don't feel like yourself, things aren't moving quickly, your confidence, your decision making, things don't flow like normally. It's very difficult. And it also made like some basic functions like filtering water, setting up a tent or whatever, difficult, because my fine motor control is compromised by both the altitude, and then on top of that, my hands are shaking and tired from running 100, 50, 100, however many miles at that point. But the thing is, you have to do all that, all that stuff. You have to make camp. You have to get your little stove going so you can boil your water and eat your food and get ready for the next leg, even if you're only stopping for 30 minutes or an hour. You need to get them done no matter what. And so those early days were very difficult, even down to just small things. Another day. On top of that, in Southern Oregon, you deal with some difficult beyond just the elevation, including what they call Devil's Peak, which is, I think, almost 8,000 feet, rocky shale, you know, pretty much straight up and then straight back down. So I scaled Devil's Peak, and at this point I'm starting to adjust a little bit to the elevation and starting to kind of feel like maybe I can build some momentum and kind of get my head in a good place. And I come up and over Devil's Peak, and after that you're dealing with about 50 to 60 miles of a stretch that they call Mosquito Hell. And it is, that name is very well deserved, as I would find out. The mosquitoes there are giant. They move in huge swarms, and they're completely undeterred by clothing or bug spray or anything like that. I had treated all my clothing, my pack, my gear, everything with perimethrin. I treated my skin with DEET, you know, for this particular area, and they did not care at all. Anytime I stopped for even literally one to 1.5 seconds, they were swarming all over me. My eyes, my ears, my nose, my mouth, biting my skin, you know, biting me through my clothing, landing on me. Eventually, at the worst points, it was even when I was moving. Like, 'cause initially, if you're running fast enough, you know, they can't really land on you. You get 1 or 2 here and there, but it's not too bad. At the worst point, it was like I'd be running full speed and they'd still be swarming me through my mosquito net, my clothes, everything. And then setting up camp, when you're dealing with the shaky hands, the sluggish mind, and all of that, and all you want is, you know, something to drink and something warm in your belly, and they're swarming you. It's brutal. And then it's like I had to do my best ninja dive and roll impression to get through the door of my tent before they could all swarm in, and still there were a dozen of them in there with me. And so that was a challenging area. Coming out of that, you come to a stretch that's called the Oregon Desert, but it's kind of just a dark joke, because it's not a desert at all. It's actually a giant burn scar, and it's been there for years. Some fire was so big and so hot that it just torched everything, not just the trees and the brush, but the topsoil, everything. It's sand and ash, and for more than a dozen miles, no good water sources. And so through this stretch and scarcity of good water sources on either end of it, I ended up doing just about a marathon without a water source. That wasn't hugely fun, particularly as all the ash and sand it's difficult to run in. It's unstable. It's easy to roll an ankle or slip. There were a lot of steep ups and downs, and I detoured to look for a water source that ended up to not be there. So extra miles on top of that. More than that, it was just the hottest day. Like, I got really lucky with the weather most of the time, but the day I was crossing the Oregon Desert ended up being a hot day, or maybe it just felt that hot to me because I was dehydrated and the landscape was just scorched. But as I was passing through, I remember thinking it was a pretty accurate representation of what hell would probably look like, because there was nothing left. So from there, I actually started to gain some momentum, and I had started to adapt to, you know, the altitude. Physiologically speaking, my brain wasn't screaming for oxygen every single second, and I started to feel more like myself. I came out of Southern Oregon definitely different than I went in. Like, a lot of my ideas about myself and attachments to things that I had a chance to really realize weren't so important, or at least didn't seem so important when I was just fighting to get up the next hill before my legs gave out and the pinch in my back gave way and I collapsed. As I came out of that portion of Southern Oregon, I was feeling pretty good, gaining some momentum. I found out that my next supply drop didn't make it. The carrier estimated it was going to be about a day late. Of course, no guarantee on that. That was naturally a pretty huge blow. I mean, I'm out of supplies at this point, completely out of carbohydrates. I'm down to like 1 freeze-dried meal. I need new electrolytes. I need pretty much everything. I had just began to build that little bit of momentum and was really, really looking forward to a decent meal and resupply on the other end for my supply drop. So I found myself having to make the decision to whether essentially make camp and wait for a day and, you know, hope that the supplies came the next day, which seemed like the logical choice, because I definitely, after the ordeal in Southern Oregon, I could have used a break for sure. You know, just a day to reset, do some prehab, some movement, and get my body right and let my mind kind of recover. I also had to consider the fact that I had finally, after all that, built just a tiny amount of momentum. And waiting till the next day at a mostly abandoned campground and little cabin lodge area in the middle of nowhere was I was gonna lose that little bit of momentum and that little bit of fire that it began to kindle in me. I made the decision to get a ride to my next supply drop and bust ass from there to try to make up the miles on connecting trails by adding in 2 additional trail loops. The downside with this, however, was these trails would be at higher elevation over steeper ground, and then I lost a little bit of time adjusting, getting there, getting everything going again. But I didn't really care at the time because I was just so damn happy to be resupplied and to kind of feel more like myself again. So from that point on, I pretty much tore through Central Oregon. As I worked further, as I began to kind of approach the north, so as I passed, you know, 3 and closer to 400-mile range, that's the point when I really started to, my body started to kind of give out little things. Yeah, little things had been giving out since 100 miles in, but I noticed certain things did actually pretty well, like the muscles in my lower legs, my calves, my tibs, you know, stuff like that. They actually seemed to adapt as I went. They were really sore in the first 3, 4, 5 days, and then after that, they just seemed to really kind of adapt to what was going on, and so that was pretty cool to observe. However, my nervous system and my joints were steadily degrading throughout the whole affair, and I could tell that. My joints was obvious pain, and then of course throughout the whole affair there was, I think, 8 minor injuries: rolled ankles, tweaked knees, whatever. You know, one time I was stepping over one of those fallen trees, my foot got caught, and my knee twisted pretty badly, to the point where I thought I might be crawling from there. But I just got super lucky, and thankfully Ultra makes a shoe that was built to just skate. My foot came off. The shoe stayed stuck in the tree, and my foot came out of it, and it saved my knee. I got a little tweak to it, nothing worse, and I rolled an ankle several times, including the stretch of the Oregon desert running through ash and sand on slopes and inclines. So it's just the little things like this that added up. But the pounding in my back and knees was by far the hardest thing physically. And then I had the most maddening knot in my upper back, and just the way my pack was, it was just something for whatever reason, and it just got worse and worse. So fortunately I had a small little rubber ball that I was using to roll out my feet and legs and hips and back and everything at nighttime. Many times I would stop, take my pack off, get that ball, put it against a giant pine tree, and just start, like a bear, just rolling. And it was one of the most pleasurable sensations I've ever felt in my life. Well, the more my body seemed to slide downhill, the freer my mind seemed to be. And I entered kind of, this weird, I don't want to say trance, but there's just this weird mindset in this other place where I had a detached look at myself and objectively and everything around me and in the world and society. And while I'm no great philosopher, it cleared up a lot of things for me and about my own interaction with all of these spaces and some of my plans and whatnot moving forward. It had been an emotionally heavy thing given my dad and the fact that I was doing this to say goodbye to him, and the fact that this was ultimately his funeral, as he had always said he didn't want one, and when he passed he didn't have one. In effect, that's what this was. And we had planned to hunt Oregon together this year. He had never really hunted it, having hunted California and Idaho. So it was nice in my own way to get to show it to him. But it was heavy in the beginning. The first few days, it was, it was grieving, dealing with those feelings of grief. But as I went on, and as my body maybe slid downhill and my mind freed itself, I found a lot more peace with that, and I was able to kind of take a healthier and more positive perspective on everything, and in my own way say goodbye to him. And that's one reason I'm grateful for everyone involved in this project and everyone who's followed along and supported it, because in their own way, it's, they're paying their respects to my dad at, in his funeral. He'd make some joke. He always did when I did stuff like this. He was still alive when I broke the weighted running world record, and he just inevitably make a joke about how his ass couldn't run like that or do anything like that, and then he would he'd tell me he was proud, and that was just who he was. He was supportive to a fault, always. as far as something I'm glad I brought, just first of all, high quality stuff. I was, I hurt my wallet a little bit more getting like a slightly nicer pack and slightly nicer tent, and that pays off big time. So I used the Kufaru 357 Magnum pack. That's the name of the pack. I believe it's the First Light Tracker tent. And I say that because the Kufaru pack has like this crazy waist belt strap technology that takes a lot of the weight off your shoulders. So it's a little heavier in weight than maybe like an ultralight hiking or running pack. But I'm glad I picked the Kufaru because that waist strap was just amazing, the suspension system. Same thing with the tracker tent. It was just a great tent, super light. Like the whole thing was like all folded up and everything was about this big. It was about 2.5 pounds, but it was crazy easy to set up and crazy reliable and durable despite being so light. So like I couldn't imagine doing it with a crappy pack or a bad tent. I'd say those were the two biggest, and then obviously a good pair of shoes, socks and all that. I always wear wool. It's you pay a little bit more, but it lasts longer. So I'd say the expense is probably about level as but wool socks and the Kuyu wool hoodies and stuff like that help keep the sun off and keep you cool and or hot, which is crazy when you think about it. They can do either. But and as far as stuff I wish I had brought but didn't bring was trekking poles. Oh my God, I ended up I picked up a pair about halfway through. I got some in my resupply, and oh my God, it was a game changer to have them. By that point, I had adapted more to the oxygen or more to the altitude, and my mind was in a better place, and I was really gaining ground. And then adding those trekking poles in, and it was like I did Central and Northern Oregon about the same time it took me to do Southern Oregon. I really, wish I had brought those from the beginning, and in the future I definitely will. But that would be the biggest thing. There's small things like you bring an external battery for, so you can recharge your phone and stuff, but if things, too big or too heavy, and you're like, I could have saved 4 or 8 ounces there, and 2 ounces here on this or that, and it doesn't sound like much, but it adds up. And I mean, that's a big deal for hiking. When you're running, that impact, you feel it a lot more. So I definitely wish I had understood how to shave my stuff down a bit better. But it's a great thing about learning on the fly and putting yourself in the fire. You figure it out pretty quick, and you got no choice. So everything worked out. I'm definitely planning on doing more. That was the thing, is I objectively enjoyed the experience so much. Like, I get it, you think, oh, like running 500 miles doesn't sound like fun. I'm used to cranking out very high volume under pretty rugged circumstances when it comes to running. So for 10 days, all I did is I ran somewhere between 26 and 77 miles every day, right? Decent amount of volume for sure, I'm not denying that. But when you look at it objectively, I'm really just a big kid out there playing in the woods. Like, I get to run, which I enjoy, through some of the most beautiful terrain on the entire planet. At night, if I choose to stop, I don't have to. I can push on through the night. I put a headlamp on and keep going. Like, I have the complete freedom to make that choice if I do or don't want to. And then at night, I stop, put up a tent, I eat a couple freeze-dried meals, slam a protein shake, and take some vitamins, roll out on my little ball, and maybe listen to like an Old West podcast on my phone or something, and then I turn it off, and I'm there under a completely uninterrupted sky. It's like something most parts of the world haven't seen in 200 years. No light pollution, very little pollution. It's just a blanket of stars above. There's gentle breeze, there's trees around me, and there's not a single other person around for miles. Like, what isn't to love about that?
What role did your fiance play in this whole thing?
Oh, I mean, as usual, she probably deserves more credit for it than I do. She's always, super supportive, and she's become very good at, being my, because in the beginning, she was the only support team of any type that I had. I was just, before social media or Wild Hunt or any of this, I was just going out and doing this stuff just, because that was where I found the most growth, was outside, in these little margins between outside your comfort zone and just shy of, death. So for this, man, she did everything, and there was even like yeah, there were many times when she stepped up, and we did this whole thing. Like, I was very adamant that I wanted to do it without sponsors, because I didn't want it to be a commercial or athletic thing. You know, this is me saying goodbye to my dad. Obviously, it's an undertaking like that is going to, you know, cost a lot of money and a lot of time and energy, and she was with me every step of the way. There's a very good chance that she did more in this than I did. Not to mention dealing with, you know, the worrying of me being away, and you know, all the not knowing and whatnot. So, yeah.
More than 450 miles to this spot. Less than 50 to go. Almost home.
So in the beginning, like I said, it sat pretty heavy with me thinking about my dad, and you know, kind of reflecting on all the times we'd had in the mountains, and you know, what he would think of the things that have happened since he's passed. And then I found myself after that, I mean, he never really was too far from my thoughts, but as I went on, I found myself after that kind of just thinking about how I don't really feel like I have a place in our current society, or the way, I don't know, the way things are, you know, the way the mainstream moves doesn't seem like I don't move in that way. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. There's no judgment attached to that, but I know I've always kind of done my own thing, and I preferred to do my own thing, but I just kind of I think it was really just taking a step out of everyday life and the noise and the hustle and bustle and the commotion of everything, and looking at, you know, having time to reflect objectively and look at things. And I just kind of, it solidified in me the feelings of like, so most of this isn't really for me, you know. Everyone's into politics or celebrity gossip or some form of controversy, or, you know, some beef with their neighbor, or, you know, whatever it is. And it's just, no thank you. I think I'll pass. So it doesn't really change too much. You know, like I said, I still was pretty much always just trying to make the world a slightly stronger place, physically speaking, and maybe a little bit mentally speaking. And go, you know, play around in the woods, chase bear with a bow and arrow, and, you know, do all the things that make me feel free and make me feel like myself. And so that's what I plan on continuing doing. So if someone goes through their entire life and never leaves their comfort zone, never learns to operate outside their comfort zone, they're never going to meet themselves. Okay, they're never going to learn who they truly are, because you don't know. Okay, if you're in your routine and in your comfort zone and in your bubble every day, you're living in one room. You're living your entire life in one room, and you will never know who you are until you step out of that room and into the world outside of that, and start understanding what's going on, and start like fucking up, you know, making mistakes, learning, growing, evolving. You know, things are going to break and then they're going to grow back. Like that's the way of the world. But if you're not constantly in that cycle, you're not going to grow. You're not going to know yourself. Okay, and if you don't know yourself, you're never going to be able to interact with this world in a maximal capacity. You're never going to be as happy as you could be. Your perceptions of people and of the world around you are never going to be as rich as they could be. Your ability and your tendencies to interact with reality will not be lined up in a way that's going to make you free and happy and, you know, maximized. If I were going to convince someone to try something hard, I would say, what do you have to lose? For one, everything's going to heal. You know, even my body, you know, my body's going to heal. 2 weeks or so, and, you know, I'm more or less fine. A month and I'm perfect fine, and that's running 500 miles. No one's asking anyone to do that, you know. So I think it's outside, it's in that beautiful little sweet spot that lays outside your comfort zone, but just short of real risk or danger to you, you know, life or limb, whatever, that you're gonna find the most growth, okay? And if you can find a way to even occasionally step into that little zone, you're gonna learn some things about yourself, and you're gonna come out of, every time you're gonna come out of it stronger, wiser, and really just a better human being. I want to thank all of you guys for watching and supporting. I know it would have meant a lot to my dad. It certainly means a lot to me, and I'm really happy I got to share this with you guys. So thanks for tuning in, and maybe I'll see you guys next time.